this week's program, we're going to be looking at a new book that's on the market. We're also going to be talking about how you should write one, or how you can, in fact, write one. Look at the boutique brewery world, but in just a moment or two, it's farm accounting. Gary, we've talked about IRD scams. Is that still lurking around?
Yeah, we've got another new one that's come out in the last couple of weeks, and they're happening more and more often now. This one's an email one. So previously we've had phone ones and all that sort of thing. Now you get an email, basically they're saying you've got a tax refund. They looked at the calculations. You've got 1 to 3 days to claim it and go on to fill out your personal details and organise it for you. Yeah, and so some people are still falling for it, which surprises me because people have warned and warned and warned. And IRD have a dedicated page on their website all about it. And this one, they actually put screenshots of what the actual email looks like. But the first giveaway is that they use an inlandrevenue.org email address, which is not a New Zealand government one.
Right.
So,
there's the cue, isn't it? It's the GOVT.
.nz for IRD. So if you get this email, it looks pretty legit. You know, it looks like a standard IRD type thing because it's got their logo and all this sort of thing. But you just look at that sender's email address, and that's the first giveaway that it's a scam.
Thing is, though, that everybody wants a refund. Everybody wants cash to come in, and if you think that there's cash there, you're going to put your hand up.
Yeah, and so you'll fill out this thing. They'll take all your personal details, and you've got no idea what they're going to do with it. So you've opened yourself up to a lot of vulnerability. So if you do get it, just delete it and ignore it.
One of the things, and you're a computer person, that worries me is putting my bank account number to give people so they can pay me, and I'm scared about how vulnerable that is.
Yeah, if it's someone you regularly deal with, it's okay. If you're going onto an international website or something that you're doing for the very first time, I'd be very, very, very careful. Do a bit of research into them first and find out a bit about them. But if it's one of your everyday suppliers or customers and they want to pay you, then it wouldn't be a problem normally.
Yeah, I did. No, thank you.
Yeah, there's still some people that don't want to do it. But if you look at most invoices that come out now, have a bank account number on the bottom. So it says, please pay into this account. So it's coming more and more common to provide that bank account, if it's someone you deal with regularly. But
only if you deal with people regularly.
Yeah, so if you're sort of going on to an overseas website in particular, I'd be worried about that. Yeah. And in that sort of circumstance, you look at sort of a one-off type credit card that just deals with that, limit the level on it and put some security around that.
Thank you, because I was wondering what the answer to that was.
That's the best way around it.
I get giddy about putting my credit card number on a whatever it might be as well.
That's one means. There's other different types of payment methods out there. For example, PayPal, where you control the credit card on your account and you just pay them via sort of an intermediary. Again, you've got to put some good security around passwords and that, but it is another option that people are using.
I mean, checks are something that are like a 78 record, aren't they?
Yeah,
well in the past now.
I think we get about 1 every 3 months from someone, so they're almost gone. And the banks want to get rid of them because they cost too much to process.
Fair enough too. KiwiSave.
KiwiSave?
KiwiSaver.
Yeah, we've had most people, when they go into pay into a provider, one of the providers, ANZ Bank, have come out and put their hand up and said we've made a mistake with some of their members. There's 51,000 members that are impacted. They've got a bank year going way back to 2009. Where the government sort of top-up wasn't coming through properly. So every year the government will put up to $521 in your account depending on how much you contribute. Well, the ANZ made some mistakes. So now they're working with IRD to get that fixed and backdate it. They're estimated it's about $50 a person, but they haven't confirmed that yet. They have also said, look, we've stuffed up. If you've been affected, we'll give you the investment return you should have got. So they will square that up, and they're hoping to have that by mid-August. So if you get a letter in the mail saying this is what's happened, well, that's the reason behind it. They made a mistake.
And it is kosher.
It is very, very, very genuine, yes. And it's good that they've gone back so far and realised what they've done and now fixing it up.
It's interesting that Mr. Cullen's actually talking for it to become compulsory and doing all sorts of changes to it from left wheel.
Yes, it's probably going to be inevitable. Australia do it and it seems to work well for them.
Yeah,
I think we'll head down that track.
That's good. Now, quad bikes isn't something that I'd expect an accountant to want to talk about.
No, we've had a bit of an update from WorkSafe. They've come out and said, look, their position was if you've got quad bikes, don't carry passengers. Under the Health and Safety Act, you've got to mitigate your risks, and that was one of the ones around it. But they realised that farmers were looking for clarification around it, so they've now come out and said, look, if you're looking at carrying a passenger, it's only where there's no other option available. You've got to look at the terrain that you're going over, and also the skill of the passenger and the rider.
The skill of the passenger to lean into the corners.
And so if all those factors line up and you know you can mitigate your risk by taking a passenger, then it is an option, but it really should be almost the last option. You should be looking at what other vehicles are available.
Or there's something called old-fashioned walking, Kerry.
Yes. True, but if you've got a long way to go, it can be quicker to chase them, particularly stop. Use the quad bike or whatever and chase them around and do all your jobs and transport goods and things.
Yeah, they become like a ute, really.
Yeah, so they've just given that clarification to the farmers. For children, that does happen. They've said the same thing. Look, just be very, very careful around them because they're at bigger risk again.
Kerry, thank you very much indeed. Well, there's a saying that in every body there's at least one book. So what's behind it, and how can we actually teach ourselves to write things down and turn it into a book? That's in a moment. How do you go about writing a book about the history of a region?
Well, I was lucky. I had been a journalist for a long time, so I knew a little bit about research. I also do a lot of family history, so I'm very acquainted with things like papers past and official records. And we were very lucky here when we were doing the one on the Northern Agricultural and Pastoral Association, the Rangiora show, which was called Northern simply because it was north of Christchurch. But all of the records there are in the Rangiora Museum, so I was able to go back through the old minute books, wonderful volumes, wonderful florid script. Just takes an hour to actually decipher the handwriting, but the information was there. Again, because it's a rural area, a lot of the family names are still there. I mean, the original family are traced in the street names, the roads around here, Gresson's Road and Staveley Road. They're all the names of people that have been in this area for a long time. The main driver for that, though, was because I was told to by people like Nicky. I fell into that one because of my journalistic background, and because it was the 150th anniversary, we decided we needed a book, and that's how I got lumbered to do it, and I found it actually fascinating. I thoroughly enjoyed doing it. It opened a few more avenues of investigation for me that I've used in other spheres like family history. But no, I was lucky in as much as that there was a lot of original information still here in the museums and in families around with had stuff.
So if somebody's looking at another district, that's where they start in museums and such? I
would think start at the museum. No, first of all, go through your membership and find your established members. Because, we've got great grandkids now in their 80s, but they're great grandkids of the people who were starting the shows. And those ones, if you've got to tap them and find out if they've still got records, that old photographs and stuff that they've got, old cups. That was one of the great thrills, was finding some old cups from
100 and something.
100. They were 150, 49-year-old cups. And they ended up in Canada and it had come back here way time ago, and it was just a fascinating story, tracing them back through to a gentleman who had been farming down near Kaiapoi. He used to wear flax sandals and a blue beret, and was known for sly grogging to his Maori friends because he was a bushman as well, and he was cutting timber and firewood out of the Kaiapoi bush. But he suddenly got a call to go back to England. It turned out he was the son of the manor, and he went back to be Lord of the Manor in Surrey.
Along with his flax shoes.
Along with his flax shoes, yes. But he was a hard case, and he had very good cattle, and it was for cattle that he'd actually got the beef shorthorn that he had, but that's what he'd got the cups for. Now, I have a suspicion that he had actually then decided that the Lord of the Manor life wasn't for him, and he'd gone to Canada, back to a sort of a colonial, because it was a grandson of his who had sent the cups back from Canada.
would you recommend somebody do it if somebody's got a slight urge?
Oh, definitely, for several reasons. One, they'll thoroughly enjoy doing it. I'm sure they will. But more importantly, it does gather that information together. It's all at risk of being lost unless it's gathered together, and you get it in more than one place. It's handy to have. God forbid, we'd hate to think of major fires or earthquakes again, but we know how delicate archival material can be, particularly if, an earthquake ruptures firefighting and everything gets damaged by water, So it's wonderful to do and get it out there, and I think more and more people are actually getting interested in New Zealand's past history as we're starting to develop more of a back history.
And you had a journalistic background,
Yeah.
but would you have been able to do it if you hadn't?
Yes, it would have been more difficult, but I'm sure you would have been able to do it, and everybody's very helpful. I mean, although I had a journalistic background, the layout of the book, I had to tap shoulders of somebody else who actually is an expert in laying out and presentation of the material. Scribbling it was second nature to me, so that wasn't difficult, no. But even if you've never done it before, you can soon find somebody who will just proofread it for you and polish up
And ghostwrite it.
and and polish up bits and pieces. Yeah, that's easily it. But I earnestly recommend anybody who's even got the faintest idea that might do it, even if they don't actually end up publishing it. Just get that manuscript together and put that into the museum where you've got the other information. They'd be only too happy to have the assembled information back, and as well as journalism and farming, history is a passion of mine, as you may gather, because I do family history as well. But yes, I believe in getting the histories together and preserving them. So I would recommend it.
Dennis, the Fire Seminar Conference just finished.
Yes, Rob, their annual conference, a two-day conference at Lincoln, attended by about 300 farmers and industry people. Very well run and very exciting and very sobering, the same event. So I just like to highlight some of the things that I saw coming out of that.
Please do, because it's FAR's an amazing organisation.
Oh, they do a great job, Rob. And just had a visiting guest from the UK who's involved in their arable and horticultural development board over there, so she knows a fair bit about what's going on in the UK. And post Brexit, it's quite scary, extremely scary for the UK farmers. It's taken 12 years to develop being in the EU, basically where they are now, and all that's about to be unravelled and unfold and change, dramatic change, very, very quickly. And of course the negotiations have started already. So things like they've actually had to combine wanted to combine six levy paying bodies to give themselves some political clout. Now that may have some merit in New Zealand, where there could be some synergies, certainly between horticulture and agriculture. Those two are getting probably closer together in the field at the moment, and I would promote the idea that there could be some very good synergies and savings in research and overlapping benefits there. But certainly in the UK, what's going to happen is that they're importing of product from the EU and they're exporting to the EU, and of course all under subsidised pricing, is obviously going to change. And for instance, pig meat, something like 95% of the UK pig meat comes from EU countries. Now let's say that drops to 50% in the future. I can imagine the selling price to the UK will be higher than the EU price was, and therefore where are they going to get the other 45% from around the world? And so all that infrastructure has to absolutely change the other way around. They have to go looking for markets, they have to go expect to pay more. And then take potatoes on the reverse side, where 95% of the UK potatoes are sold to the EU. So the mind boggles just what has to happen there the jobs that will be lost, the jobs that will be changed. The secret will be the opportunities that are created. But all this has to be adapted to, just like that, where it's taken 12 years to develop now. So the issue is all about jobs, all about infrastructure, all about change, all about what they're going to pay for things in the future. So imagine that happening here.
Don't want to.
Don't want to. In fact, I think we are extremely lucky. We gripe about this and we gripe about that in New Zealand, but really we're extremely lucky to have a supportive government, to have no subsidies, and we don't want them. We do not want subsidies. We have adapted and can live without subsidies. They would be the worst thing that could ever happen, because it creates distortions. Now, if those distortions are not there, they can't be taken away. And this is a classic example of where the EU and within the EU or without the EU is just huge distortions all the way around. The other good thing we've got is fantastic soils, great climate, and abundant water. So those are very good things. The other interesting and sobering side was agriculture in Argentina, and that is a very interesting country. It is a very long country full of fertile soils, a rectangular shaped country basically. Their soils were formed from winds coming across the Andes, and the sand is heavier than the clay. So near the Andes it was very sandy, near the coast, near the Atlantic, it was very clayey. In the middle was about right. And the issue they had there was that on the east their moisture came from the Atlantic onto the clay soils, which made them too wet, and in the west onto the sandy soils there wasn't enough rain, so it made it too dry. So they've basically farmed up the middle of Argentina from one end to the other, where they have magnificent deep soils, and that's what happened. And of course, with all this wind, a lot of erosion and things like that, so they have moved from no-till, 8 million hectares. In one generation they've gone up to 30 million hectares of no-till in direct drilling.
30 million?
30 million in one generation. So that was all about sustaining the soil and stopping that erosion basically, and they've now very successfully growing this minimum till or no-till cultivation regime. But in their country they face export taxes between 25 and 35%. Now for us that's abhorrent. You know, so you've got a government that wants to tax exports 25 to 30%. Now basically I couldn't get my head around this, but I thought, well, maybe that's because they have to feed their people first. Now imagine if that happened in New Zealand, where we are promoted, fostered, helped, not necessarily subsidised, but to export.
Indeed. Dennis, thank you very much indeed. Craft beer is becoming very much the focus in a lot of people's lives, so let's find out about what's involved with making it. We've got a situation where these new breweries, the boutique breweries, are coming on. What's the difference between a boutique brewery and a Goliath?
Well, I suppose we call ourselves artisan brewers, and the art of brewing has been around for centuries. And I suppose we're going back to formulas, which our particular company has brought from the south of Germany, Bavaria particularly, and we brought those styles of beers back, and that's been part of the blueprint of the company. And it's been a really interesting journey because we have the beautiful opportunity to enhance the great water of the Canterbury Plains from the Southern Alps. We take malts from the Dunsandel region, we take hops from the Motueka Basin and the Walker area of the top of the South Island, and we sort of find ourselves on a bit like bakers, starting early and coming to work and starting with the base ingredients and then going through a day-to-day process of producing batches of beer in a singular sense. And 1,000 litres is our batch size, so that from the original brewing day to the finished product, there's 1,000 litres of beer made per day on a day-to-day basis.
Now you've got a family of beers that you're producing.
That's correct, we do.
How do you work? What's the difference? How do you make one like a Pilsner compared to a light or something?
Okay, like everything else, the base ingredients, obviously, as I said, the greatest ingredient, and 80% of it is water. But then, of course, we start with the malts. So if I've got a selection here of malts of all different, and I'll just sort of spin that around just to sort of give you an idea that, you're starting, particularly if it was a Pilsner, if we were producing a Pilsner malt or a Pilsner beer for the day, the base malt is here. With some of these lighter, we have a little bit of wheat there, which gives us a little bit of head retention, and it gives us a nice white creamy head upon a Pilsner style beer. Plus we have a little bit of what we call Munich malt, which gives it a bit of maltiness and a bit of background and a bit of body, just to sort of try and capture those lovely hops and give it that really crisp, clean lime citrus character, which is pretty predominant as part of that style of beer. So, that would be it. However, if we found ourselves, producing a dark beer, well, a bit like making a cake, we would then interpret some of these more caramelised, toasted, and of course, obviously heavily toasted like a coffee bean type malts, which will then dictate the colour and also the flavours of the beer.
So it's very much the malter as well as everything else?
Yeah, malt is the next outside of the water, malt is the most next integral product, and then of course followed by that is the New Zealand hops.
I'm intrigued. You were telling me about the different tastes, because there are now citrus and there is now chocolate and there is now toffee. How do you do that?
Well, I suppose if you look at the base ingredients, I mean, you're particularly in your coloured malts, taking into account that these are the malts that give you that caramel style, that roasted coffee style, that nice, clean, crisp, sweet character. Then, of course, you're following around into wheat where it's getting nice and dry and refreshing. So that's where the base material comes from. The hops are then boiled into the actual malt extract. So the malt extract's made on a day-to-day basis. So we take the dry ingredients, mix with water at the right temperature, at the right pH, and create an extract, which is then a liquid extract, malt extract, which is purely maltose, sucrose, and glucose. And then that is brought to the boil for sense of preservation. And then, of course, while we're boiling for that period of 75 minutes, we're also imparting the bitterness and the aroma profile of the beer. So when we get to that, we talk about citrus, mojito, lime characteristics on the nose, and then we're talking about that sort of grassy green character of bitterness on the back of the palate, or the spiciness. They come from all the different library of flavours from the hops as well. So it's a marriage between the malts and the hops based on the individual recipe.
Now you're dealing with Kaiser Brothers Brewery, obviously, and they've got recipes that date back to the mid-1800s. Have you adapted them or adopted them, or what have you done?
Well, I think the ingredients have always been the same. I would like to probably say that, first of all, it's regional. So we're supporting ingredients that come from our region. As I said, our malts come from Dunsandel, our hops come from the top of the South Island. So what we're trying to do is stay within the South Island block. But yes, the adaptation, going back to the original question, the adaptation is still the same because the ingredients have always been the same for centuries. It's just maybe technology has made it more efficient for companies to produce it and maybe quicker in a sense. But the materials, as the base materials, are still the same.
As a head brewer, do you experiment?
Yeah, there is room for experimentation. We do come to work every day to achieve greatness. That is definitely part of what it is we do. However, there are times when, particularly when we're in the marketplace now, within our supermarket sales chain, our on-premise chains, etc., and obviously looking for export in the future, that we really don't want to sort of get too variable. We'd like to think by now, after we've been trading now since June of last year, that we've got a strong formulations in place. But that's not saying there are variables, because like any business that's based on grain, hops, growing seasons, same as the wine industry, there are many variables that can come to you on a day-to-day basis. So of course, but we as take that science and adjust ourselves through that process. We're aware of those variables. They're not major variables, they're small things, and we just tweak them and make them more easier to get to the finished product.
As a top winemaker will do.
Exactly the same, no different. That's what makes a great winemaker, is he knows his growing season very well. He knows what he's got up against him, the good, the bad, and of course he will then, shall we say, then go about his art and produce wine that actually suits that season and actually reflects that season as well. And that's another thing, and particularly in the Kaiser ranges, we have base range of styles of beer that sort of reflect international styles, coming strong from the Germanic side, and of course we've got a little bit of English and a little bit of American, but the seasonal beers will always sort of come from the season, what we've got the feeling going on out there. As we head into autumn, and of course our winter months ahead, so now dark beer becomes a bigger player in the marketplace versus the crisp, clean, dry sort of Pilsner style of summer.
We've come a long way from beer being beer, haven't we?
We've come a long way, yeah, because beer is now artisan made, artisan produced, and it's also reflected on in the household and on the dining room, and it's shared with food, and it has all those nuances to work with food just as much as wine has. So it gives that chance, to be expressed, those ingredients to be expressed, and also gives the chance for the family to share in something and sort of educate the younger generations. Beer is not just a product that was done way back in way back in the days of
the 1960s and 70s and probably the 80s.
And probably the 80s. So, whereas now it's more appreciated, the word is craft, artisan, and that's probably where I think we would always like to be. As a beer industry, I think we've finally caught up with our winemaking brothers in a sense of now we are able to offer styles and varietals of products that are absolutely acceptable at the dining room table.
And you're making it for both sexes?
Absolutely, that's another big part. Yes, there's always the female and the male marketplace. They're the big, take into account if we would logistically see that the majority of beers that are probably purchased through a supermarket chain are ladies. They do buy on behalf of the husband, there's no two ways about it.
And themselves.
And themselves, of course. So that gives them an opportunity, and then they can express the styles of beer that they like, because they're obviously maybe a little bit more attuned to maybe some of the wine varietal flavours that might then, so they can find beers in that category as well. Whereas our husband just might want something simple, green and important.
Brent, exports, where are we at as far as primary industry is concerned?
Looking very good. In fact, just recently we had the first time where all the major commodities, lamb per kilogram, beef per kilogram, and milk solids were all over $5 a kilogram, which is a first forever. That is very good. I think the initial Trump factor of the US dollar graining in strength has waned a little bit. It's the US economy appears to be a little bit weaker than it was, and the US dollar has weakened a little bit. New Zealand dollar's climbed. The May factor in British politics and scoring an own goal by calling an election and then losing was probably a fact we had not really expected in the pound, and the pound weakened by three pence, which has caused some problems. The pound, in my opinion, is grossly oversold. People are still very scared of Brexit. And as I say, the own goal by Theresa May didn't help it, but we're seeing it starting to firm back up again a little bit. So yes, I think it's obviously the exports are going along fine, but the dollar is always going to be, and our exchange rate, comparative rate exchange rate is always going to be something we have to watch very, very carefully.
As far as you're concerned, exporting wine into the States, is that opening up nicely?
Yeah, it is. The US market for wine is very good. And it's because the middle part of America has really started to find wine. And it's a long story as how they did it. There used to be big beer and bourbon drinkers in the Midwest. And wine, what's that stuff? Whenever you drank wine if you were out on the East Coast or the West Coast. And many years ago, probably 10 years or so ago, they had a lake of Chardonnay, particularly out of California in the United States, and they just couldn't sell it. And someone picked it all up and bottled it and distributed it for $2 a bottle. And it was called $2 Chuck. And
$2 Chuck. They could have used slightly better.
Well, that's basically it, because there was a chuck out product. And what the wine industry thought that'll be the end of the US wine industry. You cannot put wine at that price on the US market. And the market survived. But completely, and I actually, as per often, I sort of see the things the other way. I thought at the time it was an absolutely fantastic move. It removed the lake instantly. This guy just went round and bought wine for 20 cents a litre and put it, because obviously the bottle and tax and all those sort of things makes a big contribution and margin for the retailer. So it was still being retailed at $2 a bottle. And what it did is what I thought it would do. In the Midwest and in other parts of the United States, people would buy a bottle of this because it's 13% alcohol for $2. Wow! You know, we have to buy half a dozen bottles of beer to get the same amount of alcohol we're getting of a bottle. And so they tried it. It was interesting. I wonder what we pay. I wonder what a $4 bottle would be like. I wonder what an $8 bottle would be like. I wonder what a $16 bottle would be like. And all of a sudden you open up a whole part of the market that had been big beer bourbon drinkers to a taste product that they would never have done before. It was always seen as an elite product, too expensive, etc. So it actually did a fabulous job. And that part of the United States is growing very, very strong.
Europe, what's happening? Are you getting much way?
We don't play in Europe, full stop. Our partners, John Kennard, very smart, a sister company, is doing very well in Northern Europe. And there's quite a lot of opportunities for the smaller wineries in Northern Europe and probably in Europe full stop. The UK is an interesting market in the fact that it's very, very heavily dominated by the major supermarkets. The big five supermarkets, Tesco's, Waitrose, Sainsbury's, Co-op, they control 80% of all the wine sold at retail in the whole of the United Kingdom. So there's effectively five buyers. And what we've found, what New Zealand has found, and I think other countries have found as well, is that after the big glut, well actually around about the time of the global meltdown, companies like Tesco could come to New Zealand and other countries in the world and buy up bulk 24,000 litre containers of wine, ship them into Kingslands and Manchester and bottle them under their own labels. And so all of a sudden New Zealand owned labels per se just got wiped out off the supermarket shelves. Yes, you'll probably find 5 or 6, 8, 10 maybe on the bigger supermarkets, so bigger Tesco supermarkets of New Zealand wines, your Oyster Bay and your Villa Marias and Brancott. But all the smaller libraries, we just got taken out of the market because Tesco could buy in bulk, ship it to England and bottle it under a label of their own making. And within a period of less than 6 months, it had gone from a few ones that they did themselves to at least 150 of the bottles of wine, of the wine labels appearing on a supermarket shelf, Tesco shelves, were entirely owned by them, by Tesco, and just shut the people out. And that was the power that the supermarkets have in the United Kingdom. So the United Kingdom is a very special market for that.
Speaking of power, Hayden Paddon.
Brilliant result. They made the point that it's been 12 months since he's been on the podium. He's had a torrid time. He's carried the bad luck of the team in many, many ways. We could take, for instance, Portugal, where basically he stopped, firstly because of the electrical problem in the steering wheel. Next day they restarted him and he stopped with power steering failure. When they took the power steering apart, they found the hydraulic ram was pushing too hard up against the circlip. The circlip on his car broke, no power steering. So they took Danny Sordo's one out, it serviced that night, and it had bent it. They took Terry's out and they just replaced it. So Terry and Danny were benefiting from the mistakes being found in Hayden's car. Hayden is the fastest driver out there. Hyundai's the best car, it's got the best engine, it's certainly the best car. And Hayden is the quickest driver. You've only got to look at the stage times in Poland between service on the Friday and the finish of Saturday night, which is the really heart of the rally. And he was the quickest driver. His stage times were faster than anyone else. So he is really, really quick. But if he didn't have bad luck, he would be having no luck at all. And he really was finding out a lot of problems for the car.
Very, very briefly, America's Cup versus World Rally Championship. Two different media focuses.
Two different media focuses. I think the winning of the America's Cup, I think the most important part of that, I love it I've always followed America's Cup, but the most important thing to me is the technology side of it. The fact that we were able to beat all the power of Oracle and BMW. And here is little New Zealand outfoxed them in terms of technology. And I see the big comparison to what the opportunities we have in New Zealand is we have in McLaren. McLaren make race cars, they make road cars, but they have a company called McLaren Technologies. And that is the engine room that drives the money behind McLaren. And the same thing can be happening out of New Zealand Incorporated. We obviously, in the world who people wanting things built and designed and manufactured, they'll be looking at the Kiwis and saying, wow, that was seriously impressive.
Thank you very much indeed. Just a moment or two, we'll be asking the question, should meat be on the menu?
David, do you want to tell me first off what you're doing at the Tamania bull sale today?
Okay, at the sale today, I'm here because I, a long time ago, wrote a book about the issue of methane emissions from livestock, and I researched that matter, and I have written a book pointing out that some of the things that we get told about the methane are not really given in a full context of what the methane really is. The Wilding family here have purchased quite a few of those books individually. They like the story, and they've been promoting me very graciously and sending books to other farmers and all that sort of stuff. And I was then invited to come across to this sale, and with the opportunity of selling some books, which I've done. So we brought over 80 books in the plane, and we're hoping to take back an empty case, no books, and 24 New Zealand Reds. The big sales will happen when the sale is over, but yeah, we're selling it constantly all day today. So maybe at this stage we can take it back half a dozen Reds, but hopefully in the next hour or so we'll be able to take back more than that.
So can you take me through, I guess, the main points of what you were telling the guys sitting in the crowd here earlier, and I guess the main points of your book as well?
Well, the main point of the book is that I'm a journalist, and I edited a magazine, and some years ago, about 5 or 6 years ago, we were getting a constant barrage on television, newspapers and all the rest of it, how bad cattle were, how terrible the methane was, how global warming affected a multiple of methane. And I actually started to become a little bit guilty, or have a slight guilt, and it influenced me, and I was thinking, well, you know, I wonder if I'm in a good industry or not. This is like being in the tobacco industry. And so I thought, well, I need to research it just so that I know what I'm talking about when this issue comes up. I quickly came to the conclusion, just to shorten it a little bit, that every single atom of carbon that a cow emits after it's eaten grass, every single atom of carbon came from the atmosphere in the first place. It doesn't come from the ground, it comes from the atmosphere, because there's carbon dioxide up there. It gets turned by photosynthesis in plants, it gets turned into plant material. The cow eats the plant material, digests it and uses it in its body process and gives it out in the form of carbon dioxide and methane. And the methane eventually in the atmosphere, methane's unstable in the presence of oxygen, and it actually converts to a carbon dioxide molecule, which is the same as what it was before the photosynthesis, and some water. And so the whole thing is a closed cycle. So that you can stand at the top of a chimney stack at a coal fire station and argue about whether that carbon dioxide is heating the earth, because it's new carbon dioxide and it's from fossil fuel which has been there for millions of years. You can have an argument about that. You can't really have the same argument about livestock, because every molecule they breathe out, or belch out, comes from the atmosphere. So there's no additional carbon load created by the life of a cow, or 20 cows, or 100 cows, or 1 million cows.
Okay, so why is it important to get that message across to people that are here today?
Okay, why it became important to me is that I'm a sensitive little thing, and I sort of just felt offended that, hold it, you know, people are telling me all this stuff, and when you look into it, it's only part of the truth. They're only telling part of the story, and they're not telling the story in the whole context. So I suppose I don't get angry, but I thought that's just terrible what's happening, and I'm being exploited. That's what I thought, and I just want to write a story and campaign for the opposite point of view. And I'll add too, it's not just a question of whether or not there's any extra carbon load to the atmosphere. One of the things that cattle can do, and sheep, ruminant animals generally, if they're correctly grazed and managed, they can actually draw down extra carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. You know, the load of carbon that we've put up there since the Industrial Revolution, those animals can draw that down by photosynthesis and put it in the ground and store it in the ground. And photosynthesis is the only way we know how to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And so the farmers shouldn't be vilified by the environmental movement. The farmers should be the heroes of the environmental movement.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so one of the things that I'm thinking just listening to this is that a massive local issue that we've got here, aside from this one, is the fact that Canterbury rivers are being poisoned or whatever, you know, completely just full of filth from livestock.
Yeah.
Have you heard anything about that, or?
I have heard a bit about it, but it's, and I know your viewers don't want to hear about Australia all the time necessarily, but it is an issue in Australia. It's a big issue, and it's been an issue for quite some years. So a lot of farmers in Australia, and I'm sure it's happening here, are fencing off their riparian zones, and there are government incentives to do this. So they fence off the riparian zones, and also where they can they'll put the water points for cattle up on the higher ground, in trees and things if they can, so that the cattle go up to the high ground, drink water, sit there, dung and urine there, and then as those nutrients and things wash downhill, it actually provides nutrients to downhill. Then down in the riparian zone, the grasses and things are all growing busily away, and they absorb things getting into to the water. And the benefit in Australia is not just that we have cleaner water. The benefit is that we restore our watercourses and stop erosion, stop water erosion. That's a terrible problem in Australia. So they're the solutions that are being done in Australia, and that's the solutions that are being done by some of the case studies that I develop in this book. And that's, again, one of the reasons why the farmers should be the environmentalist heroes, not the villains.
Is it just a case of not being able to please everybody, or is it a case of farmers having to give a little bit and, you know, sort of help the environment, or?
Well, I think farmers are giving a lot, but it's not just a question of giving, because it's a type of giving that I think is one of those things where you get back more than you give. And if you change your livestock practices and change your grazing patterns in Australia and fix your rivers and things and stop erosion, your actual farming productivity on the land that you're using increases dramatically. And as again, case studies in here, or cases that I cite, the productivity in terms of cattle production or meat production can go up 2.5 times, and you're still not overgrazing the land. And you're having more frogs, more insects, more birds, more this, that and the other thing than used to be there where the land was degraded.
So it's education.
Well, it's education. The exciting thing that's happening in Australia is that it is the farmers who are educating each other. It's changed from the grassroots up. There's plenty of farmers who are not necessarily joining in, that's true, but farmers are seeing it, and in every district there's some farmer who's made these changes and has reversed things. And so slowly various other farmers start to see that. And for a lot of farming families in Australia, there's been that moment when you sit at the kitchen table with your wife, and maybe after 3 generations of farming, and say, this is not working. We're going to go broke if we keep on doing this. You know, because there's farms there in Australia, in arid places, where you've got 50% bare ground. So if you think you've got a farm of 1,000 hectares, it's only 500 hectares, really. And if and so these people, the pressure for change doesn't come from the government so much; it comes from the farmers themselves. Let's change. We've got to change something. Otherwise, we're just going to be out of here.
Interesting topic. We could go on for hours, but unfortunately, we've got to leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you.
John, how's the Reserve Bank going?
Well, I mean, it's steady as she goes. There's no real surprises. Our Reserve Bank has put in messages of the thing is what it's going to be till late next year. and expect to see no real changes. Contrasting that, we're seeing around the world, the Fed, Bank of Canada, Bank of England, starting to wake up and starting to give what they call their forward guidance of lifting rates. So there's New Zealand is sort of steady as she goes, and the world is saying, well, we think it's time to start lifting interest rates again.
So are we in a bubble?
Well, depends where you sit. I mean, is there a housing bubble? Are we a bubble of separatism? I think that the Reserve Bank is seeing where the world's going, and it's bringing up the fact that maybe inside New Zealand interest rates aren't the way to go. We need more of the macro-prudential controls, which is more about controlling who borrows what and when.
I'm thinking about Reserve Bank doing some sort of paper, or is there an explanation?
Remember the traffic lights of loan-to-value ratios. It was introduced 3-4 years ago now. So unless you had a certain deposit, you couldn't borrow the money. And it was done at the macro level. So the banks were told that you can only have certain number of loans with these characteristics. It wasn't you and me individual. Okay, individuals add up, but it was really this macro-prudential approach. So it's macro means it's the sum of everybody, and prudential means it's sitting on the financial stability side of the controls rather than the inflation side of the controls. Conventional wisdom before the global financial crisis was these things are quite separate. So on the one hand we worry about financial stability, on the other hand we worry about inflation. We have the interest rate lever for inflation, and we have these other controls around lending that create the financial stability. Those barriers are starting to break down, and in a number of jurisdictions like the UK they just say there's no difference anymore. The Reserve Bank here still sees them as slightly different things. So they are looking at their toolkit, their macro-prudential toolkit around debt to income limits. So I might earn 100 grand, and they might say you can only borrow 500,000 or something like that. Again, at the macro level, so it's the add up of a number of players rather than a particular individual. But the banks will be looking to see what you can borrow related to what you can earn. And the Reserve Bank have got a paper out now, it's quite a good paper, asking for comment from the community about debt to income. Now my own position is debt to income is long overdue. When we break the linkage between earnings and borrowings, we allow bubbles in asset markets to form, and we've got the asset market bubble in housing. And that's really because there is no relationship between earnings and borrowings. That can lead to problems around financial stability, because if I sell my house at a given point in time, not a problem. If everybody tries to sell their house at the same time, then we have a real problem. And that's really the issue around financial stability. Normal transactions, great, but if everybody tries to get to the exit at the same time, that's when you have the problem.
Trade developments.
Trade developments, well, TPP-11 is still sort of getting some headway. I'm surprised, but there we go, it's moving forward. And we have another South American deal that's recently come onto the radar. Todd McClay seems to be making some progress there. So we have a South American Pacific Partnership, or a Pacific Alliance, I believe is what it's being referred to. Pretty well involves a lot of the players from the TPP-11, not the North Pacific ones, the Japanese, Canada, or the Western Indonesia and the like, Malaysia, Brunei, Vietnam. But the South American parts, I think it adds Colombia in there, so quite an interesting development, I think.
The USA?
Well, you know, the USA, what can we say? I'll put a link up on an article I saw that really just sums up the difference between liars and bullshitters. Liars try to picture something. They give you the wrong picture to try and convince you to do something. Bullshitters really don't care. They just say outrageous things, and they watch to see whether they continue to get your support. And that's really quite an interesting distinction, particularly when it's aimed at the new president over there. So if anybody's really interested, follow the link and have a look at that. But I just thought it was an interesting read.
The UK election.
Hey, you know, we're going in for an increased majority and we come out with a hung parliament. And remember, it's a first past the post place in the UK. We're well used to it in New Zealand with proportional representation, but not in the UK. So they're having to struggle with coalitions in government. It's going to be interesting how that plays, particularly in light of the Brexit negotiations, which the markets don't feel too happy about at the moment.
And what about our election?
Well, it's still going to be about houses because it ain't going well. We're not building houses, we're not getting consents. It's going to be about water, and we've seen some interesting comments from our new political party from Gareth Morgan, TOP, the Opportunities Party, saying that we're all going to be paying for water. So that's going to be an interesting conversation. And underneath there, it's the ever sort of rumbling issue around immigration.
The Todd Barclay scenario, the media's taking that to the nth degree. No one's actually able to say what their policies are because of that.
What happens is that the discussion around the cover-up forgets the problem and pushes everything off the table. Better to focus on policy than it is to focus on the noise.
I would have thought that that's probably what the people wanted, actually, was policy.
Well, that's absolutely.
John, thank you very much indeed. Now, if you'd like to recap on what John was saying or any of the other stories in today's program, you can go to our website, which is ontheland.co.nz. I'm Rob Cope-Williams. You've either been watching or you've just missed the program, but I will be back at the same time next week. Until then, bye.